Good morning. Welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Social Media Manager for HAR. Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that today's Member Focus Monday and this week's HAR on the Move podcast is sponsored by Drees Custom Homes. Drees has been developing luxury home communities in Texas for more than 30 years. This morning, I am actually joined by Dr. Maria Elena Bottazzi. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. We know you're very busy. We have a lot of questions, but we're going to try to get through them as quickly as we can.
Yes, I will try.
Yes, but before we get into that, if you could just introduce yourself for our members so they know who you are.
Yes, certainly. So I'm a professor in Baylor College of Medicine, but most importantly, I also co-direct the Center for Vaccine Development at Texas Children's and Baylor. So we're very actively been trying to advance a coronavirus vaccine.
Yes, thank you so much for that work, which now everybody knows why we want to let you get back to work as soon as possible. That being said, I do have a lot of questions for Dr. Bottazzi. Most of these we did pull from the questions that our members are sending us. But of course, as always, if you do have questions, type them into the comments. I will try to get through as many of them as we can. And then also make sure you're sharing this post. Share this post with your audience so that other people can see this as well, because I'm sure your clients and customers want to know all of the information that she's going to be sharing today. So just getting started here, can you briefly, just if you could give us almost a vocabulary lesson, explain the relationship between coronavirus and COVID-19?
Yes, certainly. So coronavirus is the name of a family of viruses. Within the family of coronaviruses, as you have now heard, there's those that are circulating that can give you just a common cold. But there are three that we know now that have given you what is so-called an outbreak.
Okay.
And those are the Sars virus, that was the one that circulated around 2003. Then we had another outbreak, which was the MERS virus, which was primarily focused in the Middle Eastern region of the world. And now we have this third one, which the virus, actually they call it SARS-2. And it's causing the disease that is called the COVID-19 disease. Now, as you can see, based on the terminology, because they named it SARS-2, it already gives you the indication that it's very closely related to SARS. I'm going to say it's SARS-1 that was circulating in 2003.
Okay, which is where your team comes into play.
Correct.
We'll talk about that in a little bit as well.
Right.
Many people have been comparing coronavirus or COVID-19 to the flu. Can you speak to that? What are the differences? Is that a comparison we can really even make?
Well, again, so coronaviruses are a totally different family from the viruses that cause the flu.
Okay.
So therefore, you have to be very cautious at comparing a flu virus versus a coronavirus.
Right.
But arguably, because they are both considered viruses that cause respiratory type of diseases, of course, people can take some analogy of, okay, what kind of respiratory disease does the flu cause versus what kind of respiratory disease does coronavirus cause? The modes of transmission of these respiratory viruses are generally very similar too. Unfortunately, the differences clearly come from the severity of some of the diseases that they may cause, the target population that they can afflict more frequently, like flu generally also has a huge burden in small children, as we have seen. Coronavirus seem not to have been as severe yet in children. So again, you have to take it with a grain of salt when you compare one to the other. Arguably, at the end of the day, any respiratory virus, you have to be careful, and therefore you use the same general type of approaches to try for you to avoid getting a common cold to something more serious like this.
Right, because that's what I've also heard people say is, well, it's just a really bad cold.
Well, true. I mean, there are some people who, as you have seen, there's now hundreds of thousands of people who have been infected by the COVID-19 SARS-2 virus. And unfortunately, there are a few types of populations that get very serious disease all the way to the point where there's actually a lot of deaths. But there are a lot of people who do recover and a lot of people who don't get severe disease. That, however, is not an excuse for you to have this perception that you personally as an individual, you will not get hit. So do not underestimate the power of these viruses.
Okay, so to that point, we've heard a lot about the different symptoms to watch out for. What preventative measures should people be taking right now?
Well, certainly this concept that we have been hearing, and now even more and more, to the point where most likely we will start seeing even a much more drastic response, is this concept of social distancing, right? Because again, these viruses transmit through air droplets. When those air droplets then go into surfaces, and if you do not maintain certainly that social distancing, or even just the hygiene of making sure you always are washing your hands, you don't necessarily only have to use the the liquids. You can usually very easily just use soap and water. And try again to avoid mass gatherings. I mean, it's and mass gathering, yes, could be 5 people, 10 people, could be 50 people. So be conscious who you are around with and how you are certainly interacting socially.
Very good. The social distancing, could you explain that? Because we've seen some variation on what exactly that is too.
The most drastic is that you, of course, do not have actually any contact with anyone, right?
Okay.
I mean, there's a level of what you can or you cannot do, certainly in your area of, your work or at home or when you go out. I think you just have to be mindful and cautious of where you are, your surroundings, and unfortunately we will going to have to follow whatever our state or federal officials dictate us. It is not a made-up thing. If they are going to come up with some drastic measures, we are going to have to follow them, because the worst that can happen to us is seeing the same trends that we may have been seeing in other countries, and then we are not going to be able to really manage this. And honestly, for me, I think the message is, yes, it may not affect you. Yes, maybe you'll get a non-serious disease, but you do not know who's around you, and therefore this is a community approach, is not an individual approach.
So it should not be taken lightly.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. What are some of the most reliable sources that we should be listening to and paying attention to?
So, again, I think that you have to rely on those who have clearly the expertise. So, of course, being an academic and being in the medical center, you all here in Houston, we are so fortunate to having the Texas Medical Center. So what best to focus on the information that you see in our hospitals or even our universities or academic health centers. So Baylor College of Medicine, you just Google www.bcm.edu, and they have on the front page an open link for coronavirus preparedness that can be certainly accessed by the general public. The same goes for Texas Children's Hospital. Certainly our state, city, and local health departments, have, the most accurate information. And make sure that when you are in these social media type of tools, look at who the source of the information comes from. If it's coming from a source that it's not really very well known or that you don't really know who it is, I'd rather just focus on those that come from either, health organizations or even some reputable, news media, trusted sources.
Yeah, very good. So speaking to some of the misconceptions, we've seen things, everything from if you hold your breath for a certain amount of time, you don't have it, or you should drink water every 15 minutes because that will make the virus go down to your stomach and your stomach acids will kill it. Are any of these true?
Well, certainly there's a clear value of drinking water, so please do not stop not drinking water. But I think, again, the best that you can do is look at those sources that really give you the right information. Maintain health practices, certainly maintain, awareness of, what your surroundings are, what you're doing in your workspace, or even try to minimize that social distancing and not just get yourself in a panic mode or in some sort of phobia. Just keep yourselves to the same thing that you would do if you were to try to avoid a common cold, and then maybe hype it up a little bit because, of course, this is a little bit more serious.
Yeah, so that actually leads me into the next question, which is there's everything from people who think this is a hoax to people who think this will be, the end of humanity. So what is the level of concern that the general public should have at this point?
Well, clearly it is of concern.
Yes.
And we should not, treat this as non-serious. We have seen how the disease has been spreading not only from the Asian countries, but now you've seen the situation that is happening in Europe, and I think that is why we need to pay attention to the measures that our officials tells us of what to do. Do not take it lightly, because this is definitely something that we will most certainly recover as long as we as a community listen and do things in support of, helping us as a whole community, and not necessarily just, trying to, protect as an individual. This is the opportunity for Houston, which, since the 9 years that I've been here, have seen. We are such a strong community that we know that together we're going to be able to do this, but it requires, everybody to pitch in.
That's wonderful. Yes, thank you. So if you're just tuning in, I'm joined this morning by Dr. Maria Elena Bottazzi with Baylor College of Medicine. In just a little bit, we're going to start talking about the coronavirus vaccine that she and her team are working on. If you are watching, go ahead and share this with your audience. Obviously, this information applies to more than just realtors. But to that point, a little bit later in this program, we will be joined by Shally Ralph, who will be talking about real estate specific items and things that you should be paying attention to, questions that we've gotten from members that are a little more real estate specific in dealing with clients and open houses and all kinds of stuff. So be sure to stay tuned for that as well. So kind of I don't know if I can ask you to predict the future here, but we've seen a lot of different numbers on how many Americans this could potentially affect. Do you have any thoughts on that, on how many Americans could potentially be affected?
It's hard to tell, and of course, again, it's how quickly we can address this issue of containment and certainly mitigating the transmission, of course, and how our medical center and hospitals are also being prepared. And I think, we already have witnessed how in other countries the situation could eventually lead to be out of hand. So this is why we need to make sure that we don't learning those lessons, not reproduce those lessons.
Sure.
So again, take very seriously that if we've seen a trend somewhere else, that we don't have this expectation of, well, that's only there and it's never going to happen on this side of the continent. And I'm even expanding this to the entire Americas, right? So I think we need to be very, very cognizant that yes, it could exponentially explode, again, if we do not follow the recommendations, which is, first and foremost, the social distancing, making sure that we understand how to very rapidly reach our medical experts, what is the algorithm they're using for triaging and testing. I think the testing will be very important, and I know already here in Houston we're most likely going to be well prepared, because now we have all our even private hospitals able to provide that, that testing to the population in the city.
Yesterday, Dr. Fauci said he wouldn't be opposed to a national lockdown. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hope we won't get to that drastic measure, but again, these are experts that they are trying in their best effort possible to prevent, more of a crisis of what it already is. And so, if we all have to suffer for a small period of time that type of consequence, we need to, do so. Keeping in mind, again, that, there is a lot of challenges, especially when, you're not only impacting your work, your even economic ability of making money. I mean, I know that they're looking at a lot of these different impact. It's not easy for me to say, well, yeah, okay, I'll stay home and I won't do anything, and some of us can work remotely, some others probably can't.
Right.
But at the same time, I think we need to be cognizant that we have to do something, and we have to do something quick and probably drastic.
Okay. So let's talk about the vaccine. I believe your team developed a vaccine for SARS.
Correct.
And since you said this is so similar, how has that helped your team in developing a virus, or a vaccine for
Sure.
this virus.
So going back again to this similarity between SARS-1 and SARS-2, there's three main things that I would like to, even if it's a little technical. So
in case anybody missed it, SARS-2 could be another name for...
Well, SARS-2 is the name of the virus that causes COVID-19.
There we go. Okay.
And SARS-1 is the virus and the disease that was circulating in 2003.
Okay, very
so
good.
the similarities is that they come from, again, the same family of coronaviruses, but genetically their coding sequence is the one that really dictates, how the virus is actually expressed, right, as a corona. They are very, very similar. It's approximately 80% similar between SARS-1 and SARS-2. The second optimistic, information is that these viruses, for them to be able to infect the human, and very specifically the cells in our lungs, they have to bind themselves through a very specific receptor on our cells that allows them to be able to then enter our cells. So both SARS-1 and SARS-2 use the same receptor in our human cells. Compared, for instance, to MERS, that they're not similar. They're a little separated in their families, like saying it's like third cousin removed versus being a brother or maybe even a first cousin. And then MERS also, for instance, uses a totally different receptor. So the good news is that because they are very similar, because they use the same receptor, it is possible that interventions, whether they're vaccine or even therapeutic interventions that may have been under development for SARS-1, they could potentially convey some protection or some therapy for SARS-2.
Okay.
In addition, we also already know that structurally, when you go into like very sophisticated science and look at how these viruses, in their three-dimensional structure look like, they seem to be very, very similar too. And on top of that, it's quite unique, and we've been hearing a lot more in the science publications that if you were infected by SARS-1, let's say back in the year 2003, your sera or your blood, the components in your blood that have these immune cells that theoretically may be protecting you against SARS-1, if you use that and do some experiments, we've already seen that your blood can neutralize the SARS-2 virus.
Oh, wow.
So it's not clear if it's you're already immune, if you already had SARS before, but clearly there is something that is giving you the indication that you can maybe even partially being protected. In addition, they're already starting to look at patients that already have had COVID-19, can they see their plasma, their sera, can that be also conveying potentially protection against to another person? So there's all these therapeutic strategies that people use that potentially one could be even what we call passive transfer, where I take your cells that you were already infected and you of course did not die and it wasn't severe, you responded well, and then can you then protect someone else? And those are generally called like either monoclonal therapies or antibody therapies, and a lot of people are trying to move towards that, including, for instance, also some drugs that you could look, right? In our case, we are focusing on preventing new disease, not already treating those who were infected. And again, looking at the response that you can induce when you immunize someone with the SARS-1, and again, creating this response, maybe that response already can protect you, and ideally, maybe not 100%, but what do you think is the highest priority right now? Is reducing severity of those who get severe disease, meaning that they do not have to end up in a hospital, they do not have to end up in intensive care, and ideally we do not want this virus to kill.
Right.
Whether you get a common cold right now, it's not as important, in the priority of importances, because everything should be important.
Sure.
Ideally you want to, one, reduce deaths, 2, reduce intensive care and intubation and respirators and all that, and 3, even just reduce people having to be inpatient in a hospital, and manage it with just home care, clinical management, maybe some therapeutics, and that is what I think these types of vaccines can do.
That's great. That's great. So once the vaccine goes through the testing period, how long would it be before it's available to the general public?
So there's a lot of buzz about how quickly you can get these vaccines, certainly into testing, and as much as we can work with regulators to try to move and accelerate and maybe do things a little bit more, out of the box. The reality is that all vaccines, as well as any biologic intervention, has to first be very highly evaluated for safety. And you have stages of evaluation of safety. You, of course, do a lot of what we call preclinical, using animal models. There's some very special toxicology studies that you also have to do in animal models before you go into a human population. And even when you enter into a human population, you first start very small, with not a lot of people, usually healthy people, no more than 30, 40 people. Clearly just look at safety, and then slowly those studies, you add more people and start looking, you make it more powerful as far as statistically powerful. And so right now everybody's trying to enter into this early phase 1 safety evaluations. For there to move into saying, okay, now we can give it to everybody, it is a big jump. So it has to probably happen with cautiousness, with reviewing every time you do a study, you stop and you evaluate the data. And so I think that in the next year, we're going to see a lot of these vaccines going into the safety evaluation. And then very rapidly see what can you do to then maybe first target those that are very severe target populations, like the older people, the first responders. And then from there to go into the general community, it still probably will take, 4 or 5, maybe even more years. Right.
Okay. So there's claims that coronavirus might be seasonal, like the flu. Is that?
Well, there is a possibility that could happen. As we heard, certainly the virus initiated with just a few, I guess, transmission where you can even follow where the transmission really came from. When it starts becoming what they are now calling like community transmission, that you really cannot tell where it's coming from, that means the virus is getting more and more adapted to circulating in our human, I guess, bodies. From there to then become something that will, come seasonally, we will have to wait and see. But clearly, if it's not this coronavirus being seasonal, what we've already know is that it's been in the last less than 3 decades, we already had 3 different ones, which means these coronaviruses are finding its way. Remember, it's survival of the fittest, right? I mean, as we are looking to always try to survive ourselves in this world, all these pathogens are also looking for ways to how to improve their way of reproduction and moving around, right? So these movement of these coronaviruses that generally don't have the experience of living amongst us, because they all originate from circulating in animals, when these viruses start jumping from the animal into the humans, and then the humans rapidly can transmit them amongst ourselves, we have to be more cautious to see how often are we going to see this coming.
So my next question was, once you recover from coronavirus, are you susceptible to it again? And earlier you mentioned the thing about SARS-1, so.
I think it's a question that we are going to see more data being built up. I mean, it's hard to say unless you see the evidence, right? We already know that, these viruses certainly change. SARS-1 is not SARS-2, but it's similar enough. And so what we need to see is, again, is it true that we can build our own immune health that can at least be protected if we were to find an infection of a similar virus in the future? It's hard to say, but I think scientists are definitely looking at all that.
Very good. Just taking a quick look at our members that are tuning in. I see a lot of people telling you thank you so much for being here, and good morning.
It's a pleasure.
There was a question about the test results.
Mm-hmm.
How long do they take to come back?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that right now they're trying to deploy these what they call high throughput and certainly very a little bit more sensitive tests.
Mm-hmm.
I'm confident that as when we are starting to see ramping up the testing in all the different laboratories that are now being targeted to have these tests available, very rapidly we will have the population get their results in a timely fashion. I mean, I think that's one of the ultimate priorities that these testing locations have, right? I mean, not to get backlogged. And that's why this concept of, these high throughput tests where that you can do many at the same time, it's going to really change the landscape of how we can get, results back pretty quickly.
Pam asked, why is this in the spring rather than beginning of the fall like others?
The link between of whether you can get an infection in general, any infectious disease. Why do you get a flu or a cold?
Mm-hmm.
In different times. It's still not necessarily very clear. Do you only get it when it's cold outside, or do you only? I mean, some viruses do have a seasonal cycle. Some others you can certainly get a cold anytime.
Sure.
I think that is another thing that they are going to be monitoring very closely, and that is when it's going to be determinant of whether these types of viruses eventually will become so-called seasonal.
Okay.
I mean, we can't predict it right now. I mean, we already see how the curve is changing certainly in Asia. We will see what happens in Europe. As you know, sometimes it's just because of the different seasons. We'll see whether it's going to resurge again, maybe in the fall. I think that's what the epidemiologists do. So I would keep track on that kind of information.
So I have one more question for you, and I see a lot of our members have questions that we'll be asking Shally in a moment. In just a little bit, we're going to have Shally Ralph come on to talk about some real estate specific topics in regards to coronavirus. We have seen in some other countries that they seem to have peaked. In Taiwan, for example, we're seeing low rates. What are some things that they are doing that you think we should be doing here?
Well, I think that it's a combination of the practices that their population are doing, abiding by this concept of social distancing, certainly some of the measures in the cities or counties or the states. So that is why I think our officials are really looking at what have been the experiences everywhere, what has worked better, to try to see if it can be adapted to certainly our communities and our country. Mm-hmm. Everybody has different ways of culturally of doing things. So I think for us, for instance, it's already difficult not to shake hands or even give a kiss. I mean, I'm Hispanic Italian, so we're always hugging and
come here.
And so it's been like, oh my God, I have to make sure I don't try to avoid that. So so it's quite an interesting. I think this is a very interesting set of lessons that we as a world community have to learn. This is not going to be the last outbreak that we will see. I hope that we will learn something to be more, to live more in community, mm-hmm. to take care of each other rather than trying to always find a way of how not to. So let's open more the dialogue. I know Houston is a big mm-hmm. Community that we all support ourselves.
We always hear Houston is resilient, so I'm sure we will.
We are
do the same thing
exactly,
now.
And I think that we've already seen the great responses from our community, and let's just be resilient, and we'll get over this.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us this
thank
morning.
you. It's been a pleasure.
We do not want to waste any more of your time. We want you to get back to work, so we're going to let you go ahead and go. But thank you again.
Thank you.
But don't tune away. We do have Shally Ralph coming on, who's going to be talking about real estate specific topics. I know a lot of our members are asking those questions already. Before I have Shally come on, I do want to make a few HAR specific announcements. Obviously, we're well aware of everything that's going on, and we're going to continue to provide service to our members no matter what happens. All 4 of our locations are currently still up and running, If we go to a work from home status, as others have, we will obviously notify our members. All of our phones are internet based, so we can actually take our phones home and still answer your matrix questions and MLS questions and membership questions from home as well. We have changed some of the classes. We have moved to some online training. If you are registered for a class starting this Wednesday through April 30th, you will be notified on what is the status of that class. Some of these classes have been canceled. Some of these classes will be moved to a virtual classroom, so you will be notified independently on that. Our super centers are still open at all 4 of our locations, but you can also shop store.har.com. You can always shop our super center online. We've had that for a while. And lastly, any in-person meetings, if you were involved with any advisory groups or anything like that, and of course our board of directors and HRIS and all of those meetings, they have, the in-person has been canceled, but you will be contacted individually as to the status of that meeting, if it will be taken online at all. And of course, you guys know that we are always here with your questions, concerns, so if you have any other questions about getting support from HAR, you can always send that our way. Shally, thank you so much for taking time to come and sit down within 6 feet of me and discuss some of these topics. We do have a lot of questions that have come in from members, so I want to get to those, but I also have some questions for you, Shally. We've seen a lot of questions about open houses. It's obviously Monday.
Right.
You know, we even saw in our Platinum group, some people were saying, should I cancel my open house? I went ahead and held mine. I had a good turnout. Some people had none. What do you think we should be doing going forward?
Well, I think, and you know, with the situation that we're in, it's certainly a business decision, and agents should consult with their sellers and talk to them about how they would like to move forward. Just like with any world we're typically in, we typically ask the seller if they want to hold open houses or not. Obviously, we want to, do things to protect people that are entering the home as well as protecting our homeowners. So making sure surfaces are kept clean and wiping down lock boxes and things like that are all important. Having the ability to have hand sanitizer there for people, and washing your hands, just like we heard a little while ago.
Right. Just,
doing things that we normally do, but doing them more often.
Right, and maybe a little more thoroughly.
And a little more thoroughly, that's right.
Okay, one question here that we've seen, if you do hold an open house, can you require people to wear face masks? Like some require that you wear booties or things
take
like
your
that.
shoes off and things like that. I think it's just important, no matter what we ask a client coming into the home, that we ask everybody the same. Okay. So just remember that what you ask of one, you should always ask of everybody else.
Okay, very good. So there are some tools, if you could explain to us, tools that HAR has that have been available that allow realtors to work remotely. Can you discuss those a little bit for us?
Yes, we have Transaction Desk and Dot Loop that really allow agents to process their files remotely. And so many things are done, digitally in today's world anyway. E-signatures allow for easy access to have contracts signed, which is a normal practice for business in today's world, really.
Okay.
But HAR does provide all those tools for our agents.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So there are a lot of a lot of agents asking about driving clients around. Should we still be driving clients around at this point? Again,
that's a business decision I think that an agent has to make. Most agents are independent contractors, and they need to decide, what's safe for them. Again, I would just make sure that you have hand sanitizer with you, wash your hands thoroughly, and do it more often, and certainly look at your own health. I mean, I know of several agents that have situations in their lives that might put them at risk, so they've had to make some decisions there personally.
Okay. Is TREC doing anything regarding CE requirements?
At this point, they are not. We have been in contact with TREC. Certainly, those of you that are at home, there are online opportunities. CE Shop has offered a discount code right now for us. But most agents, I think, in today's world take a lot of classes online too, and HAR offers so many opportunities.
Yeah, and if you're not aware of that, CE Shop is offering a discount code just because of this situation that we are currently in. That's HAR 35, and it gets you 35% off the course you're going to take. So be sure to jot that down if you need it. HAR 35, and it's just the CE Shop .com is their website.
And certainly if anything changes, we'll let people know, and I think TREC would probably reach out to those that might be affected.
Absolutely. So have you heard of any delay in closings?
I have not, and I have been in contact with several title companies and representatives. They are obviously trying to determine how they can work remotely as well. I know some of the ones that our agents deal with more regularly might have sent some of their staff home to work remotely, but closings are still happening, and they're happening in their offices.
Okay. Another question we've seen, is there a clause or anything we need to add to our contracts to cover one of the parties backing out because of coronavirus?
I think in today's world, as always, we want to ask our clients to consult with an attorney because we have the contract that's in place, which does bind both parties. So I think it's important that you consult with an attorney if there's questions regarding that. Texas Realtors is working on some verbiage, and as they move forward with that, for emergency situations, we'll certainly let people know about that as well.
Very good. Back to TREC really quick. This was a specific question I saw. Is TREC offering an extension? And I think at this point the answer is no. Correct?
At this point the answer is no, and we were talking about that earlier today. I think there was an extension, I think, given during Harvey, but many of us didn't have access to internet and power at that point. Right now we have power, we have access to internet, and so classes can be taken online.
Use your CE shop.
Use your
HAR35.
CE shop HAR 35.
There you go. So if we discussed with Dr. Bottazzi the thoughts of a temporary lockdown, how would that impact pending listings?
Well, again, at this point, we really don't know. Certainly, I mean, closings typically have to happen in person. So I know that most title companies are working through the process right now. And again, I would think we would be a great resource to let people know what's happening.
Very good. Do we have to disclose if a seller tested positive for coronavirus?
I really don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I mean, I think if a seller tested positive, it would be more likely that they would be at home and they would be in isolation themselves.
Not necessarily.
They might not be in a hospital. They could be at home in self quarantine. So at that point, I would think that he would certainly want to let people know. I think anybody that has been possibly, open to the virus would want to let other people know that they had been around.
To that point, I've seen some members asking if I currently have an active listing, should I withdraw it at this point? Should I, just pull it off?
Again, that's a business
the
decision. We have people that wrote contracts this weekend, and
Right.
so business is really still as usual. People just need to be a little more careful.
So much of the real estate transaction does take place online and over the phone.
It does.
It's with the exception of closing, I think, for most people.
Well, and even touring homes. I mean,
Right,
HAR has
yeah.
made it so easy for us with the multiple photos that can be placed on a listing. There's so much that can be seen. Certainly, I wouldn't want to buy a home that I hadn't seen, but
business doesn't necessarily have to
stop.
halt. Yeah. And I think your answer to a lot of these, it's a business decision. That is the best answer because some people might be perfectly fine and comfortable showing a home, whereas others may not.
Absolutely.
And, will that client or customer really want to go out and see these homes at this point? So there's a lot of things that I think we can do from home if we need to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very good. So one question here, what if a client or a homeowner is in jeopardy of foreclosure due to a loss of income?
Well, certainly I think the most important thing at this stage is to consult with their lender and see what their options are. I mean, I think from the most point, communication is the most critical piece of that. And the more you stay in contact with them, I would assume people would be trying to work with people, especially during this time.
Okay. So we talked about doing a lot of this online. Would you suggest videos of the listing at this point?
Certainly. I mean, if you're not doing listing videos, it's certainly a great way to share information about your properties. We have seen agents over the last, I would say 5 to 10 years who've done a lot of Facebook videos and FaceTime with their clients so that they may not be here locally, so they can share the information with them.
Uploading a listing video is a recommendation in general, but
absolutely.
I see a lot of agents will do like a Facebook Live, a walkthrough of their listing. Maybe that's something that we should be really looking at doing at this point.
Absolutely.
Another question, what if my broker insists I work in the office?
Well, I can't imagine a broker in today's world insisting anybody work in their office, especially since most agents are independent contractors.
Right.
They choose to work where it's easiest for them to do their business. I think for the most part, if you're an employee, then that's something you should consult with your broker, and they'll make their independent decisions on offices.
Very good. So I just wanted to check on some of the questions from our members. Gary had asked for suggestions on showing homes. And several people wanted to know about that, so you've already made some suggestions there. Just a comment here from Harold: agents have to be health conscious at all times. Some properties are in deplorable conditions. Showings can be rough. So, he's just saying there's a lot of other conditions.
A lot of other conditions that are
Yeah.
out there. Again, the hand sanitizer, the soap, keeping things with you.
Andrew asked, and you already answered this really, should we stop public and broker open houses?
That's a business decision,
Yeah.
I think, between you and the sellers.
Yeah, very good. So let's see, anything else here? They're saying this is so timely and appreciated.
There are multiple websites out there, and I think we discussed that earlier on the show this morning, so I think it's important that you stay in contact with reliable websites
Very
to
good.
gather the information that you need.
Yeah, very good. So that looks like all the questions. There's some people making comments and suggestions. Somebody shared the HAR 35 discount code for the
Great.
CE shop, so thank you for sharing that there. We will provide some links after this is over as well. I'll provide the link to the CE shop with the discount code, also the link to the HAR Supercenter online, and some of the links that Dr. Batazzi mentioned as well. Shally, is there
That's
anything else
wonderful.
that you want to share with our members?
No, I think again, do what you can to stay safe and keep the social distance where you can, but also I think we have to live our lives.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to remind everyone before we sign off that today's Member Focus Monday and this week's HAR on the Move podcast are sponsored by Drees Custom Homes. Drees has been developing luxury home communities in Texas for more than 30 years. So thank you, Drees, for sponsoring. And that is it for this Member Focus Monday. We will be back next week. We're discussing how that's going to work for Member Focus Monday and what topics we might be discussing in the coming weeks. But we will be back next Monday at 9 a.m. We'll see you then. Have a great week.